So it's time to put on your tinfoil hats because today we're going to be talking about the purple conspiracy, the idea that the color purple does not actually exist. Steven Spielberg's 1985 movie The Color Purple was nominated for 11 Academy Awards and yet won none of them. How could that happen unless the movie didn't actually exist? Oh, you've seen it, and it's on YouTube and HBO Max. Okay, apparently I misunderstood a little bit. So today I'm talking about the purple conspiracy, a plot by the cabal of flower arrangers to convince the world that purple exists. Even my wife, whose favorite color is purple, doesn't realize that she is just incredibly fond of dark blue. Dear sheeple, roses are red, violets are blue, because purple is not a real hue. Now this poem is a rare glimpse into how the world worked before the 17th century when the purple conspiracy started to take hold. It certainly has nothing to do with the fact that purple does not rhyme with any other word. Sincerely, Protan. Everything that you think is purple is really just blue or pink. I have never seen purple in my life, and there are literally dozens of people just like me, including the 141 people on the Reddit community r/purple conspiracy. Shout out. We can't all be wrong, right? I mean, purple doesn't
You do know that everyone on that subreddit is colorblind, right?
Yes. Okay, so apparently I misunderstood again. Alright, apparently I'm going to have to explain that last one. For colorblind people like me, protans, one of the hardest color pairs of confusion is blue and purple. We don't actually see those two colors. We see a single color that is both ambiguously blue and purple at the same time, legitimately called Blurple. Don't look it up. But in nature, fashion, design, my medicine, blue is just a way more common color. And so unless I have context to think otherwise, if I see a Blurple, I'm going to call it blue just because then I have a higher chance of being correct. Colorblind people have all sorts of coping mechanisms in order to minimize the scenarios in which we misidentify a color, and one of these is by admitting to ourselves that purple doesn't exist, so we call all Blurples blue, and hey, get by a little bit further in life. But it's actually not just colorblind people who claim that purple doesn't exist. There are several famous YouTube channels with millions of subscribers that have taken up banners against the purple conspiracy. Minute Physics, Steve Mould, Echo Gillette, Half as Interesting, and even Scishow are all on Team Conspiracy, and they're all wrong. Today on Chromophobe, long-winded intros, and also debunking the real purple conspiracy. Okay, so the real purple conspiracy. What is it? Well, when you were a toddler, you were most likely introduced to colors by the rainbow, such that you could learn all of the individual names for each color. The rainbow is missing things like brown, pink, gray, black, and white, but it's fine. It's a good place to start. Then as a kid, you started to learn about color mixing, and all of a sudden the rainbow wasn't the best tool anymore, and so adults introduced you to the color wheel. They needed to build off what you already knew, so they explained the color wheel as a rainbow that's rolled up so the tips almost touch. But you couldn't just roll up the rainbow and let red and violet touch, because then you'd have a discontinuity. You had to leave a gap, fill it in with a bunch of pinks and purples, and then presto, you have a closed color wheel that is a useful tool for teaching kids about color mixing. Kids now know that mixing blue and red make purple, which is a simplification, but it's good enough for 8-year-olds. But when an 8-year-old wants to describe all of the colors in existence, they say all of the colors in the rainbow, as if the rainbow is somehow some complete representation of all colors, and the ones that aren't in the rainbow, the pinks and purples, are somehow fake colors?
And then there's f***ing purple. Purple is a lie. I mean, it literally doesn't exist. It's a color your brain makes up.
And let's not be completely dismissive of the rainbow. After all, rainbow is just a kid-friendly way of saying the decomposed spectrum of electromagnetic radiation in the human's visible range. But that's not something I can teach my 2-year-old. Importantly, the rainbow contains every color that can be represented by a single wavelength of light. For example, 480 nanometers appears blue, 580 appears yellow, and 680 appears red. Yet, no single wavelength of light can make magenta, and therefore the purple conspiracy is born.
If you look at the light spectrum, you'll notice that magenta isn't on it. There's no wavelength for magenta, and that's because magenta doesn't actually exist.
What the hell is magenta, and why should I care if it exists? Okay, don't mind Dalton. Magenta was invented in 1859, which was long after Dalton was already dead. I mean, this guy is literally older than colors. And if I was going to explain to him what magenta is, I'd probably say that it's one of the primary colors used in printers, but then I'd have to explain what computers are, and yikes. When I was a young warthog, purple, violet, magenta were all the same color to me. I thought they were about as different as crimson, maroon, scarlet, 3 colors, by the way, which are all the same color, just of varying brightnesses. But no, violet, magenta, and purple all have important distinctions that I cannot explain using a rainbow or a color wheel. So allow me to introduce the chromaticity diagram, a tool that contains all of the colors in the rainbow, plus all of the colors not in the rainbow. This diagram essentially shows 2 dimensions of a color normal human's 3-dimensional color space, where the third unshown dimension is perpendicular to the screen and represents brightness or luminance. Every possible color that you can perceive is on this diagram, or a brightened or darkened version of it. In the middle of this diagram is the neutral point, which is either white or gray. As we move around this neutral point, we follow the hue dimension, and as we move from the neutral point to the perimeter, we follow the colorfulness dimension, which is usually referred to as either chroma or saturation. The curved part of the perimeter is called the spectral locus, and be careful not to say spectral locust, because that is just a ghostly grasshopper. The spectral locus is actually just the rainbow, exactly how you learned it. We can see Roy G. Biv and all of the singular wavelengths that those colors correlate to. This portion of the spectral locus is called violet, between approximately 400 and 450 nanometers, and the straight part of the perimeter is called the line of purples. In the middle of the line of purples is magenta, which is a primary or secondary color. And you also have pure pink, which is a tertiary color, which is 3 parts red and 1 part blue or violet. But pink is a type of purple. Who knew? Importantly, none of the purples, from magenta, fuchsia, or pink, are on the spectral locus, i.e. the rainbow. And so YouTubers think that they can bully them and tell them that they don't exist and that they're worthless and ugly and stupid. And okay, I mean, now I'm just projecting, but you get my drift. Every color not on the spectral locus is a non-spectral or extra-spectral color. That includes everything on the line of purples, but it also includes every color not on the perimeter, which is all of these colors. Actually, of the approximately 1 million colors that normal humans can see, only about 1% of them, those that lie on the spectral locus, can be excited with monochromatic light, i.e. a single wavelength. It just goes to show that extra-spectral colors are not extra special.
At its most basic form, color is just wavelengths of light.
Which is partially true. You can say that color is determined by wavelengths of light, but color is not defined by wavelength of light. And I get it, it's incredibly compelling to try to define color by wavelength, because as humans, we're always trying to define the properties of our world back to some simple physical parameter or constant. But when you see a color, your brain does not process that as a wavelength, because vision does not work like hearing. When you hear a tone, your brain perceives the specific pitch or frequency of that tone. So when you hear a 500 hertz sound wave, the cochlear cells that correspond to 500 hertz signal your brain, and all of the other cochlear cells essentially stay quiet. If you strum a guitar, you hear 6 separate frequencies, and so in your ear there are 6 separate groups of cochlear cells that all signal your brain, and the rest of them do not. But your vision works differently. If you see a single wavelength of light, your brain will receive 3 different signals. If you see 6 different wavelengths, or 600 different wavelengths of light, your brain still only receives 3 signals. These are your tri-stimulus values. Now, I've described the tri-stimulus values before, so I won't dwell here for long, but suffice to say that all colors that you can perceive, everything on the chromaticity diagram, is fully defined by the relative excitation of your L, M, and S cones. But think of how color is defined by a computer. When your screen shows you a color, it's not changing the wavelength of some monochromatic light source. It is adjusting the relative brightness of red, green, and blue LEDs. It's essentially the same way that your eyes work, just in reverse. The 3 signals that your cones send back to your brain can derive from a monochromatic light source, But monochromatic light sources are actually super rare in the world and pretty much are restricted to real rainbows, as well as shining a laser into your eye. And please do not shine lasers into your eyeballs. All of the colors you see around you, whether they're natural or synthetic, are a combination of several wavelengths of light that we sometimes call a continuous polychromatic spectrum. Each color that you can perceive can be excited by an infinite number of different spectra. For spectral colors, only one of those infinite spectra is a monochromatic spectra and the rest are polychromatic. So when your brain sees green, how does it know the difference between a polychromatic green and a monochromatic green? Well, your brain don't know and your brain don't care. It only knows about the tri-stimulus values, which are the same regardless of whether the spectrum is mono or polychromatic. And this is why I say that even though 520 nanometer light can induce you to see green, green is not defined by 520 nanometers. It is defined with every other spectral and non-spectral color by the tri-stimulus values.
Unfortunately, it's hard to say exactly why our brains make up this specific color. Like, there's nothing that seems to be particularly special about magenta, but we see it anyway.
And he's right insofar that there is nothing special about magenta, because while magenta is all in your head, all colors are all in your head. The gamut of colors that you see in a rainbow is a distinctly human phenomenon. Any other organism that has a slightly different visual system with slightly different positions of their cones will perceive a completely different rainbow and completely different chromaticity diagram. In fact, if I took all of the opsons in your cone cells that have normal spectral sensitivities at 420, 530, and 560 nanometers, and I doubled them all somehow so that they were then 840, 1060, and 1120 nanometers, you wouldn't be able to see any of the wavelengths that you do now, but you would still see all the same colors. Because before, when orange used to be excited by monochromatic 600 nanometer light, now with your cone doubling, orange is excited by monochromatic 1200 nanometers of light, which used to be infrared to you. Color is not an inherent property of light, it is a property of our visual systems, and there is nothing normal, physical, or real about spectral colors versus extra-spectral colors. So I hope I've helped you see the world in a new light. This is Chromophobe. Ha! You're not gonna get me, monochromatic space lasers.